Amara is a wife of David and the mother of a 6-year-old daughter named Tanya. She is also a regional manager who travels frequently, sometimes for a whole week. Her husband, David, also works long hours, though his job doesn't involve traveling. Due to her and her husband's busy schedules, they hired a cook named Joyce and a nanny called Blessing to keep their household running smoothly. The arrangement seemed perfect, at least for a while. Until one weekend, when Amara returned from one of her business trips unannounced. She dragged her suitcase through the front door, her shoulders aching from the long journey. She kicked off her heels and called out, "David! Tanya! Joyce! Blessing! I'm home!" But no one answered. The house was unusually quiet. Instead, she heard muffled laughter from the kitchen. She pushed the kitchen door open and froze. There was David, her husband, leaning against the counter, his arm around Blessing, their daughter's nanny's waist. Joyce, the chef, was sitting nearby, giggling at their conversation. Amara felt the blood drain from her face as she said, "What is going on here?" Her voice was sharp and sliced through their laughter. Everyone turned. The air was thick with tension. David stepped back quickly, his face unreadable. Blessing was scratching the back of her head, avoiding Amara's gaze, while Joyce nervously adjusted her apron. "Amara, you're back early," David said with his calm voice but uneasy eyes. "I asked you a question, David. What is going on here?" Amara repeated her question with her sharp voice. David replied, "It's nothing important. We were just talking." "Talking?" Amara's voice rose. "With your hand on her waist?" She pointed accusingly at Blessing. Blessing opened her mouth to speak, but Amara cut her off. "Don't even try to say anything. How dare you do this behind my back with my husband? Is my husband my daughter whom I hired you to care for? Where is my daughter?" she demanded. "She's sleeping inside," Blessing replied with a shaking voice. "Okay, since she's sleeping, are you now my husband's nanny too?" Amara asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Without waiting for a reply, she turned to Joyce in anger and said, "And you're so stupid for knowing this is happening in my house and siding with them instead of telling me. I pray you receive similar treatment as a reward for your hypocrisy. Now pack your things. Both of you are leaving my house tonight." "Amara, you're overreacting," David started, but she shot him a fierce glare, and he immediately fell silent. Later that evening, David approached Amara in their bedroom. She was folding clothes, her movements stiff with anger. He began carefully, "Amara, we need to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," she replied without looking at him. He insisted, "It wasn't what you think. I wasn't—" She snapped at her husband. "I don't care what you think you weren't doing, David. You humiliated me in my own house, with our workers. That's so ridiculous." David sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, fine. After you sacked them, what's next? Are you going to stop working and take care of our daughter, or how is she going to cope with us working and no domestic workers to attend to her?" Amara opened her mouth and replied, "You're so funny. How can you ask if I'm going to stop working because I have a daughter? I love my daughter, but I won't stop working just because I'm a mother. I'll contact the staffing agency and hire another nanny and chef, but this time they'll be male." "What do you mean by male domestic workers?" David asked furiously. "Have you forgotten our child is a female?" Amara replied, "How can I forget that? You know what? You can stop working and take care of our daughter yourself if you don't want male workers. If you can't stop working, then I'll hire whoever I want, because I'll never let you do the same thing to me twice." "Honey, don't let your jealousy take over and make you make bad decisions," David said sincerely, his heart pounding as he continued. "You know we both have busy schedules. How would we monitor the male workers you're going to hire? What if they start molesting our daughter?" Amara replied, "I'm not jealous of whatever rubbish you're doing. Since you don't work on weekends, why don't you use that time to focus on and care for our daughter instead of spending it with your mistresses? If you do that, tell me, How can anyone hurt her without you noticing?" David scoffed and shook his head. "You know what? Just do whatever you want and face the consequences. Hire new staff. I don't care." Amara said coldly, "I will, and nothing bad will happen to my daughter. So you should just dream on with the bad consequences you're looking for." The new nanny, Leo, and the cook, Arthur, started work the following week. Leo's charming smile and soft-spoken demeanor immediately put Amara at ease. Tanya seemed to like him too, giggling at his jokes during their first meeting. With Amara away on a business trip, David began coming home early from work to monitor their daughter. For a while, everything seemed fine. But then, the changes began when David grew comfortable and trusted the new staffs. He started slipping back into his old habits. He began coming home late from work and spending weekends with his mistresses. One quiet Saturday morning, the house was empty. Amara had left for a business trip early in the morning, while David was out of the house and busy with whatever kept him away most weekends. Arthur, the cook, had gone to the market to buy groceries. Only Leo and Tanya were home. Tanya sat on her bed and playing with her doll when she heard a knock on the door. "Come in," she said softly, not looking up. The door opened, and Leo stepped in with a towel over his shoulder. "It's time for your bath," he said with a forced smile. Tanya hesitated and said in a small, innocent voice, "But I told you yesterday that I can bathe myself from today on." Leo chuckled, his tone mocking. "Don't be silly. If you can do that, why would your mom bother to hire me? Or why didn't she tell me it's not part of my job as your nanny? Come on." Before she could protest, he took her by the hand and led her to the bathroom. Tanya felt uneasy, but she didn't know how to stop him. Inside the bathroom, Leo filled the tub with warm water and gently undressed her, all while keeping up his fake cheerful tone and said, "See? There's nothing to worry about." Tanya hugged herself, trying to cover her body. "Uncle Leo, I can do it myself. Please go." Leo's smile vanished. "Stop arguing and get in the tub," he said firmly. She stepped into the water reluctantly, shivering, not from the temperature, but from fear of Leo's voice. Leo knelt beside the tub, his hands moving over her body as he washed her. At first, Tanya stayed quiet, hoping it would be over soon. But then his hands wandered to her private part, and she cried out loud, "Uncle Leo, stop! It's hurting me!" Leo's expression darkened, and his grip her tightened, and replied callously, "If it hurts today, it won't tomorrow." Tanya's eyes widened with terror. "No, please, stop!" she screamed, tears streaming down her face. But Leo didn't stop. Instead, he forced himself on her and raped her. Tanya screamed for help, her voice echoing in the bathroom. "Mummy! Daddy! Somebody help me!" But the house was silent. Her mother was miles away on a business trip. Her father, who's busy with his mistress, had no idea what was happening to his daughter. And Arthur, the cook, was still at the market. When Leo was done, Tanya curled up in the tub, shaking and sobbing. Her small body hurt in ways she couldn't understand. Leo stood up, adjusting his clothes like nothing had happened. He looked down at her, his voice cold and devoid of any remorse as he said, "The day you tell anyone what I did to you is the day the person would leave this world. Do you want anyone to hurt because of you?" Tanya didn't respond. She couldn't. She just sobbed quietly, too scared to even look at his face. Leo left her alone at the bathroom and walked out. Some days later, the house was so quiet. As usual, Amara was away on her business trip. David was still at work, and Arthur had gone to the market. It was just Tanya and Leo in the big, empty house. Tanya sat in her room, trying to focus on the coloring book in front of her, but heard footsteps approaching. Her hands trembled as she held the crayon tightly. The door creaked open, and Leo stepped inside. He closed the door softly, smiled at her, and said in a low voice, "Tanya, why are you sitting here all alone? Let's play a game." Tanya shook her head, clutched her crayons tighter, and replied in fearful whispered tone, "No, I don't want to play any game with you." Leo walked closer, crouched down beside her, and said in a sickly sweet tone, "Don't be like that. You know you shouldn't make me angry, right?" Tanya's eyes filled with tears as he reached for her. "Please, please leave me alone," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Leo's face darkened. He gripped her arm, tightened, and muttered, "You're such a crybaby." He started messing with her petite body and raped her again. When he was done, Tanya curled up on the floor. She hugged her knees to her chest. Her cheeks were wet with tears, and her tiny body shook with silent sobs. Leo stood up, fixed his shirt, and said, "Remember what I told you." But this time, Tanya looked up at him, her small face filled with anger and sadness, as said in a trembling voice, "I'm going to tell my mummy that you hurt me every day. I'll tell her everything." Leo's expression changed instantly. His smile vanished and replaced by a cold glare. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and whispered in a chilled voice, "You think you're brave now? Go ahead, tell her. But if you do, I'll hurt them. Your mummy, your daddy. I'll make them leave this world without a trace." Tanya's eyes widened, her breath hitched, and let out a weak, trembling scream. "No, no, no! Please don't hurt my parents." Leo smirked and said, "If you want to keep them safe, keep your little mouth shut. Understand?" Tanya nodded slowly, her body frozen with fear. "Good girl," Leo said, patting her head like she was a pet. Then he turned and left the room, leaving Tanya trembling on the floor. When she was finally alone, she buried her face in her hands, crying quietly. She wanted to scream, to run to her parents and tell them everything, but Leo's threat echoed in her mind. She couldn't risk it. She couldn't lose them. Even though she's so young, she knows the feeling of losing parents. Her classmate lost both her parents in a car accident and was being maltreated by her uncle, who was also her guardian. Consequently, she didn't want anything bad to happen to her own parents. Trapped in her own fear, she stayed silent,